Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Thank you for joining us today. It's good to see. I see people coming in chat. Awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's a beautiful day where I am in the Pacific Northwest of Canada, which is unheard of. So I'm very much enjoying it. Uh, today's webinar is to all talking about OneDrive policy change. Title, of course, Race Against the OneDrive Clock: How to Stay Ahead of Microsoft Deadline. And so we will be kind of going in and diving into this, what this means and what you can do. Now, you might notice we are on a new platform. So it's a really cool experience. It's a SQL. You will be able to actually ask questions. So there is a Q&A section just onto the right of your screen. You'll see a little tab there that says Q&A. You can ask your questions there. You can even upvote them, which is fantastic. And if we cannot get to the questions live, do not worry, because our team will follow up with you later. So we'll make sure to get those questions answered for you. You'll also be able to take part in polls and vote in the poll section when they go live. So you'll actually be able to see them there. And again, all on that right side of the screen on those tabs. Also, all resources talked about will be shared in the resources tab. There's already resources there, so you can go in and take a look at those. And of course, the webinar is being recorded, so do not worry, you will get access, and we will send that the webinar to you via email after it is completed. Now, that's a little bit of housekeeping I wanted to talk about. Now let's talk about who's here today. So, of course, there is me, your wonderful host. My name is Shaylin. I am the Community Engagement Manager for ShareGate, but I am joined by the person that we want to hear from, Mark D. Anderson. He is a Microsoft MVP, the founder and president of Simpraxis Consulting. And because I love rules of three, I'm going to add in also the organizer for Collab Days New England. So welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining us today.
One of the organizers. I can't take all the credit.
Fair enough. Yeah, one of the organizers.
Sure. Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to kind of talk about this kind of policy change.
Yeah, this was actually, I was telling you just before the call, this was an interesting one for me because I had to learn a lot. Even though they announced this back in August, few of us paid any attention. And I had to sort of sift through things, and we've been working with clients on it. And so it's been a learning experience that I've enjoyed and has been useful, and now I'm going to share with everybody. So hopefully I can give you some information that will help you in your journey on figuring all of this out. And I'm going to ask a dumb question: are the slides up?
We can get the slides up there, no worries. Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah, there we are. Perfect.
I'm going to let you put me in the right place. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Just a couple things that we're going to try and cover today, and I'm going to show you a bunch of little details, but there's sort of an overarching thing. There's some new rules about how OneDrives will be handled after somebody leaves your organization, or at least when you remove a license from somebody, what happens to their OneDrive? So how can that impact your organization? What do you need to think about? What are some of the risks that might expose for you, and how you should think about them? And of course, if you can avoid risk, that's always a good thing. And then how to manage those unlicensed OneDrives. What should you be doing sort of in the short term to handle this change, which is sort of in mid rollout right now? As well as some ideas about what you should be doing as you go forward. How should you have been thinking about OneDrives, and how should you be thinking about OneDrives in the future? So what's really happening here? So this was announced back in August. I think I said that already. But as of January this year, Microsoft is either going to be deleting or charging for the storage that your unlicensed OneDrives incurs. And I'll explain what the difference is and how that works. So if you've been managing your OneDrives well, and you're on top of this and this was not news to you, you're probably not on the call. But also, I think from my experience, I would say 99% of people didn't even know that OneDrives hung around after they were unlicensed, or haven't really paid much attention to them. And as I've looked from tenant to tenant, I've seen that, that I have access to, I've seen that, that people are in various stages of sort of understanding and management of those OneDrives. So I think, if you haven't been looking at what happens to OneDrives after people leave your organization, you're in good company. It seems to be a common thing. Microsoft hasn't been charging for that storage, so you probably haven't really cared that much, other than maybe some security questions. So why is this different? Well, historically and still, every at least E-level tenant gets a terabyte of storage for the tenant itself, plus 10 gigabytes of storage for each licensed user. That's SharePoint storage. And there's often confusion about what's pooled and what's not. That storage is all pooled. So your tenant has a certain amount of room based on how many licensed users you have for all of the SharePoint sites. But each licensed user also gets a terabyte of OneDrive storage. And some of the lower end licenses get a bit less. But a terabyte is a lot of storage. And there's historically been no extra charge for that storage when someone leaves the organization. That's what's changing, or at least the disposition of those OneDrives is going to be changing. So when people leave an organization, I see a lot of variability in what people actually do. Sometimes they just unlicense the person. Sometimes they delete that user from intra ID or on-prem AD. Sometimes they move them to a different OU, organizational unit, if they're still in on-prem AD. Lots and lots of variation of what happens. But if you're in the cloud, you're most likely at least unlicensing the user so that you don't have to pay for them anymore. That makes total sense. The OneDrive then becomes an unlicensed OneDrive and is still sitting there depending on some other settings that you have. For example, if you have a retention policy applied to your OneDrive content, then that content remains for the duration of the retention period. And there are a couple other settings that come into play as well, and I'll touch on those as well and a little bit about, excuse me, how they interplay. So how is this new sort of way of managing OneDrives gonna look in your tenant? There's a link on this slide. I believe you can click on it, and if you can't, it's actually not that hard to find. If you go to the SharePoint Admin Center and look under Reports, one of the options under Reports, and you'll see a different number of options depending on what things you're paying for in your tenant, you'll see OneDrive accounts. And that'll show you a summary of your unlicensed OneDrive sites. To date, we really haven't had a good way to look at all of the OneDrives in our organization. In the SharePoint Admin Center, we see active sites, and those are SharePoint sites. There's no sort of equivalent thing that shows us what OneDrives are out there. It's basically a one-to-one correspondence for the users. So maybe that hasn't been necessary, but with this change, I think one of the things that's sort of missing for us is how do we look at all of the OneDrives in our organization? You can do this with PowerShell. You can do this with, yes, you guessed it, ShareGate. And in fact, ShareGate is a great reporting tool for looking at your OneDrives. But until now, this sort of back corner of our digital estate hasn't necessarily been something we've looked at a lot. So what does that report look like? And hopefully you can see that well enough on the right side there. This is an example from our Simpraxis tenant. We're 6 people. We're a very small organization. So we actually have 9 unlicensed OneDrive accounts in our tenant, which seems really high because there were only 6 of us. Well, we took a look at what was actually there, and we had set up test users and given them licenses at various points. So those OneDrives were sitting there, but they had 0 storage because we'd never, these fake John Doe users had never actually uploaded anything to their OneDrive. So a bunch of OneDrives there, or a handful of them that were empty. Not a concern. They have nothing in them. One account was an ex-employee who had left, and yes, we'd unlicensed them, and their OneDrive is still sitting there, and it's about 13 and change gigabytes of content. Now, in theory, when they left, we would have gone in there and sort of taken out what was important. And I like to think that we did, or actually, I think in the most likely case, nothing that they store in their OneDrive is actually important to take out, because that's not how we use our OneDrives. We store the content that we want to share in team sites, and I'll talk more about sort of that governance question. So if that one OneDrive were archived, which is one of the things that's going to happen here, we would pay 5 cents a gigabyte times 13 plus gigabytes a month. So we'd pay 69 cents a month for that content storage. No big deal, really. I mean, it's less than a US dollar for us to pay for that extra storage. But do we actually even need it? And in this case, I can unequivocally say yes, or sorry, no, not yes. I had 2 choices there, and I said the wrong one. No, we don't need it, because the person left a couple of years ago. We know that there's nothing in there that we need. So that's content that we can clean out, or allow Microsoft to clean out, because we don't need it anymore. So that's an example in our little tiny tenant. Here's an example from a client I'm working with. It's much larger. They're a bit over 2,000 users, and they have almost 1,600 unlicensed OneDrive accounts. So they use a decent number of contractors. I'm working with them as a consultant. I have a OneDrive there. People come and go. So over time, their unlicensed OneDrives have sort of built up, and their total is over almost 11 terabytes. That's with a T, not a G, of storage used. The ones that were these OneDrive unlicensed OneDrives go all the way back to 2018, so almost 7 years. And the reason that they're still around is there's a retention policy in place on the majority of them. You can see that 1,570 of them, I think that's the right number, have a retention policy on them that's preventing them from being deleted. We'll skip whether that's a good idea or not. But that makes up about almost 11 terabytes of content, which at a nickel of storage per gigabyte, once it's archived, would be about $550 a month. So, a little bit more appreciable amount of money, and certainly something that nobody's planned for, unless they read that article back in August and got on it. But I can tell you, in this case, they did not. And again, the question I always want to ask, but do they even need the content? At what point in time and in size do you really care about what content is still out there in those OneDrives? So there are a couple settings that come into play and have an impact on how long these OneDrives are going to stick around in that unlicensed state now that things are changing. So in the SharePoint Admin Center, under Settings, there's a setting for OneDrive called Retention. And that's been there for a very long time. Most people have never touched it. The default is 30 days, but you can change that. I recently saw a client has it set to 365 days. So the 30 that's in brackets in the words on the left are the value that would be in that box. So basically, this isn't purview retention. Like so many words, Microsoft uses the word retention in multiple places, meaning different things. In this case, it's just applied to this two OneDrives. Once a user is deleted, and they do have to be deleted for this to kick in. So when a user is deleted, the 30 days, in this case, 30 days kicks in. The OneDrive is scheduled for deletion in 30 days. At the end of that 30 days, it goes into the recycle bin, the site recycle bin, because a OneDrive is actually a site. And then after 63 days after that, it's permanently deleted. So that's sort of the normal, what's been going on in the past. So if you've deleted users, after 93 days, if you haven't changed that value, your OneDrives have actually been deleting in the past. So again, something that you may never have paid much attention to. There's no view of how many OneDrives are out there. There's no sort of OneDrive storage number that you can look at. So probably just haven't paid attention to it. But that number seems to still be respected in the retention period as this new change is rolling out. So if you do have that set to a year, what's going to happen is those OneDrives are going to be archived, and you're going to pay for the storage while they're sitting around while that retention period is running out. So when is all this happening? Like I said, it was originally announced back in August. None of us paid any attention, or at least few of us did. The program actually started on January 27th. So that's when that page showing your unlicensed OneDrives was available. I think it was available before that, but that's when they started rolling out this change to tenants, and it may or may not be in your tenant yet. And I'll show you an example of the report that would show you whether or not it's hit your tenant yet. During this transition period until May 16th, things will be in flux. Your tenant may not be affected yet. It may already have OneDrive scheduled for deletion. If you postpone, you run the risk of having some of those risks kick in, either saving too much, paying for too much storage, or losing content that you actually think matters, which would also be a bad thing. So I don't think postponing is a good idea. I think you should be on top of this now. You don't want to wait until May 16th. In fact, if all of us were conscientious, we would have done something about this last August. But like I said, most of us don't read everything in the message center, and we may have missed this. So how does this work? If you have no retention policies applied to your OneDrives, and in that sense, I'm talking about Purview retention policies. Oftentimes, organizations will apply a Purview retention policy to just all OneDrives or certain OneDrives to prevent the content in those OneDrives from being deleted. If you don't have any of that retention in place, and you haven't changed that 30-day window, your unlicensed OneDrives are going to be set to read-only after 60 days and then deleted at 93 days. Why 93? It's the same sort of sequence, the same timing mechanism as most of the recycle bin stuff. I don't know where those extra 3 days ever came from, but that's the timing that it worked and how it works. So if you do have retention in place, a retention policy applied to a given OneDrive, it will be set to read only after 60 days, same thing. It's moved to the archive state in 93 days. Now, archive here means Microsoft Archive, which is a newish service that takes your site, or OneDrive, like I said, is a site. You can also archive SharePoint sites, and moves it to basically cold storage. So it is not accessible by anyone. It is if you try to access it, you get a screen that says this site has been archived. Talk to your admin if you want to restore it. And it'll stay in that archive state for as long as the retention policy is in place, for a fee, which is that nickel a month US per gigabyte per month. If you want to restore your OneDrive from that archive state, it is 60 cents US per gigabyte. You may have seen an announcement recently that Microsoft 360, in fact, there's a link at the bottom there. Microsoft 365 Archive eliminated the reactivation fees for SharePoint sites, but they didn't eliminate the reactivation fees for OneDrives. So you will pay that amount, 60 cents per gigabyte, to restore a OneDrive. And it's, at the moment, Microsoft 365 Archive is on a site level. So either you restore the whole site or you restore nothing. So 60 cents times a terabyte of potential storage in a OneDrive might actually add up to some change. So again, do you really need to save that content? Your answer to that is going to vary, and that's okay, but you need to be thinking about the cost implications of that. This is that same Simpraxis tenant, my tenant. This is a listing of the 9 unlicensed OneDrives that you saw in that summary. This is just another click on that same screen. This shows whose OneDrives they were, how much storage they use, why were they unlicensed. Most likely, it says license removed by admin. That's probably the most common thing, right? But you'll also notice there's this distinction made when the owner is deleted from Entra ID. So deletion is different than unlicensing, as I mentioned earlier. So you can take this data, you can export it to Excel. That's what I tend to do, with most of these things that I want to sort of slice and dice. And then you can perform some analysis there that will help you understand, well, what do I want to do with this whole set of unlicensed OneDrives? You'll notice it also says deletion blocked by. As I understand this, and some of this is not documented as well as I would like it to be, but that deletion blocked by is, why has it not been deleted yet? The owner is active in Entra ID is one of the reasons. We haven't removed the user from Entra ID. We haven't deleted them. We've just removed their licenses because that user still exists. Their OneDrive still exists. Now you might say, well, why would Microsoft do that? They're just trying to charge us for things. Well, historically, they've charged us for nothing. The good thing about having the OneDrive stick around is if somebody comes back after, so maybe they leave to go get another job, they don't like it, and they come back. Or maybe they're a seasonal worker, and 3 months later they come back, their OneDrive would still be there. So that's actually a good thing. It's just not it's not going to be a free ride anymore. And then to the right there, you see deletion scheduled and status. So I actually had given my wife an account in our tenant. You can see Melanie Anderson there. She's never used it. I deleted her from Entra ID, and because our one setting of retention days is set to 30 days, it's actually scheduled for deletion in May. So 30 days plus the 63 days puts us into May. So that's why that one is going to be deleted. If you see deletion scheduled in that column that you didn't just manually trigger yourself, that means that the change has gotten to your tenant because those deletions haven't been scheduled before. So you might see deletions scheduled all in May. You may see them staggered out based on when people left, because that retention period also applies. So the data is there to make some good decisions. It just takes a little bit of work, and that's the part that I don't think you should postpone. So what you want to plan for is, well, what do we want to do about that? I can look at my 9 and make some very easy decisions. 8 of them are empty. My wife didn't need an account. I'm going to delete her. We know that's going to go away. And then we have the 1 that's got content in it, and I'm going to let that be deleted as well. Very simple, because I can see the whole thing on one screen. But you probably will have more, and they may be in different states, and you may not even know who the people are. So you're going to want to decide how to handle each of these subsets. And then you're going to want to start planning for, but what happens with active ones? The OneDrives that people have today, eventually everyone is going to leave. So how should we think about this going forward? It may be a time to start thinking about, well, how long should we keep OneDrives after somebody leaves? If our policy has been, well, we don't pay attention to OneDrives, maybe it's time to start paying attention to OneDrives. Maybe you think about applying a different retention policy, for example, when someone leaves, using Purview to keep their OneDrive for 6 months, for example. So you're sure that the manager can take some time to go through the content and move stuff out that's supposed to go somewhere else. So planning is important. And then act. What are you going to do here? Once you've made those decisions, you want to clean up the historical and unneeded OneDrives. Um, there probably will be a bunch that have zero storage. People just didn't use their OneDrive. Those are really of zero concern to you because they've got zero in them. So you can just let those go away, or you can actively delete them. If you have a retention policy in place on those zero storage OneDrives, there's no reason for them to go to archive. You could get rid of them before that archiving happens. It won't cost you anything to restore them, but you can't delete them when they're in archive status. So it's a good time. It's a good housekeeping time. If they're too old to keep, that other client I mentioned where they have OneDrives that were unlicensed all the way back to 2018. Well, for your organization, what's too old? Is it a year, 2 years, 3 years? After which, or further back, you would just say, well, these OneDrives probably have no value to us. But decide what that time period is, too old, and delete those. So try and clean things up before they go into archive so you're not having to restore things from archive in order to get rid of them. The other thing you might decide to do is move content out of a OneDrive or many OneDrives into another location, into somebody else's OneDrive. This is the idea behind assigning a OneDrive to a manager so that they can grab the things that are important when an employee leaves, or migrate it into a SharePoint site. This is one of the things that ShareGate has excelled at for years. I want to say almost decades. That's a migration. You're taking content from one site and putting it in another site. You may reorganize it on the way. That's a great use of ShareGate. And I'm not here to shill ShareGate. I use ShareGate to do this stuff all the time. It's really, really helpful. Then you want to think about, if you haven't been doing it, reassigning the ownership of people's OneDrives to their manager for disposition when they leave, and make that more of an active process. I think a lot of organizations have enabled that capability, but the manager may not even pay attention to it or even know that that's happened. So they're not actively moving content out. Make that a more active thing. Make that part of your governance. And then think about whether your offboarding processes need to adapt because of this. OneDrive content has always been of value. It's just that we may not have paid as much attention to it in the past. You put a little bit of money on the table, then all of a sudden people start paying more attention. How can Purview help? So Purview, if you don't know, is at one point was called the Compliance Center, and in fact, in some of the UIs, it still is. But Purview is where you can set up things like retention policies. It's where you manage sensitivity labels and retention labels and lots of other things that help you with data lifecycle management. But a retention policy is something that you can apply at a site level. And I think with a OneDrive, that typically is the way you would do it. Retention labels are wonderful when you want to apply different retention rules to different types of content. So for example, if policies need to be kept for 6 years and personnel records need to be kept for 12, then retention labels are good for those. Retention policies are a bit of a higher level thing, and this is sort of a gross generalization, but if you have retention policies that you want to apply to your OneDrives, you might have a retention policy that you apply while a OneDrive is active. And then when somebody leaves, maybe you apply a different retention policy. It's, while they're there, let's apply a retention policy of a year. And then once they leave, let's apply a retention policy of 2 years. I'm making up those those time periods, but something like that. So think about whether that 93 days is enough after somebody leaves, or whether you should apply a retention policy to make that process longer. In other words, if people who would take over people's OneDrives as their managers say, well, it's not realistic for me to take a look at things after 30 or 60 or 90 days. Maybe a retention policy to keep it around a bit longer would be a way to sort of cushion that blow. If your OneDrives already have a retention policy applied, you may want to change it. as people are offboarding. So just think about whether you want, a different, and once you pass that barrier, do you want the retention policy to be different? Keep in mind that retention labels cannot be changed after they're applied. Retention policies can. So if you're applying retention labels to the content in your OneDrives, I would, my opinion is you're doing the wrong thing there, because OneDrive should be sort of transitive content that a user is building for themselves before they put it in a place where it should be shared with others. And so I'm not sure that it's a good use of that retention mechanism. But again, ask that question: what are you going to do with this content if you retain it? Are you just really postponing an inevitable deletion? I think all of us do this very often in our lives. I've got a drawer full of stuff over here, a bunch of stuff in that drawer, and we just moved into the house. Then I didn't bring everything, but I've got a bunch of stuff in that drawer already that I probably should just throw away because it's not useful. It's a bill from last year or something like that. Think about whether you really need the stuff that's in those OneDrives, and try not to be too broad brush with it and just start incurring costs. So Purview can be a mechanism that can help you stretch or widen or narrow the amount of time that your OneDrives stick around to enable better process. So with all of this happening, what should you do? Well, you can do nothing. You can absolutely do nothing. And what's going to happen if you do nothing, if you don't bother? Unlicensed OneDrives, once this kicks in on your tenant, unlicensed OneDrives will be deleted after 93 days. That may be totally fine for you. Any OneDrives under retention will be retained and archived, and you will be charged for that archive period until that OneDrive is deleted at the rate we've talked about. So you may start incurring some costs. There are two things that are happening there. You might end up having to spend some money, and you might lose some stuff that you actually care about if you don't think about it. So, give it some thought, and then, take some action here. Think about how people in your organization are actually using OneDrives. I'm going to talk about governance for OneDrives in a minute. But if people are sharing a lot of stuff out of their OneDrives, I had a client where the HR department was sharing all of the HR benefits stuff from the HR department's employees' OneDrives. People would leave, and all of a sudden, nobody had any benefits anymore. That was a problem, right? So make sure that people aren't, ShareGate can help you with identifying those sharing links, but try and figure out if any of this content's sort of still in play, or people intend it to still be in play. Determine if it should be kept any longer. Maybe think about using a retention policy. Consider assigning the OneDrive to the person's manager for disposition. That's a setting that we can add that in the old classic user profiles area to say delegate when somebody leaves. And then if it's not important stuff, just delete it. One of the things that you're going to want to do as Microsoft 365 Archive is sort of in play here is turn it on. I think it's better to turn something on ourselves rather than letting Microsoft turn on without us. So if you don't know how to do that, you go to storage services in your tenant settings. You need to be a global admin for this. That path is sort of ridiculous. Admin center settings, org settings, pay-as-you-go service settings, storage, archive. That link will actually get you straight to that page. And you just have a couple settings here, and you can turn on SharePoint site archive. Now that's sort of separate from what we're talking about here, but as long as you're doing this, you might as well turn that on. And then archive unlicensed OneDrive accounts, turn that on. One of the reasons that you might want to do this yourself is you can think about how you want the billing to work. And I don't know all of the variations across all of the different kinds of tenants, but if you're going and doing this, then you have a little bit more control over it. Excuse me. And you also can start getting some reporting on what's in the archive state once it's turned on. So you may just want to do that to start taking advantage of things. Archiving is a pay-as-you-go service. So if you, for example, have a SharePoint site, let's keep it to SharePoint where everyone sort of knows what sites they have. If you put one of those sites into the archive state, you're going to pay at a lower rate than if you kept that that site around. And it also takes it out of the total storage allocation for your tenant, that thing where you get a terabyte plus 10 gigabytes per user. It's a way to sort of take things out of the big number. You won't be charged for it as long as you haven't gotten over your storage allocation. So it actually may be free to archive, but it helps you sort of get yourself a little more wiggle room in that storage picture. So I've alluded to all this a bunch of times, but I'm gonna focus a little bit here on why governance for OneDrives matter. One thing that's sort of good is on the right side. They're removing, I never used this acronym before, but of course the EEEU sharing permission. EEEU is everyone except external users. That's a sort of pseudo group that you can use for permissioning that allows everybody who's licensed in a tenant to get at a particular thing. Up until up until April 10th, you've been able to share content in your OneDrive with everybody in the organization, and that's led to some of those strange situations where intranets have links to stuff in people's OneDrives, which is just not a good state. So they're removing that setting, so that ought to inform your governance decisions. I think that actually is a good step, because that's really not what OneDrives are for. So OneDrives are really intended for my stuff, my work stuff. I've seen, and I'll bet you'll find a few when you go through, and if you go through and look in any detail at these unlicensed OneDrives, sometimes people are storing their DVD collection. I've actually seen that. I've seen their whole CD collection, their DVD collection, all of the photos they've ever taken, things like that. That's not the intent of OneDrive either. That's personal stuff, unless you're in the business of photographing. What OneDrive really should be used for is the stuff that you're starting to write or develop that is a work product that you're just not ready to share with anyone yet. You might share it with one or two people just to, hey, could you take a look at this? Am I on the right track? But as soon as it starts to have any kind of value whatsoever, it probably ought to be in a team site. If I'm in the HR department, I ought to have that document in the HR team site, or whatever team site makes sense for the kind of work that is. It shouldn't stay in my OneDrive. I should move it. It ought to go in a place where it should live perpetually. The things that belong to the organization go somewhere else. They go into SharePoint sites, either team sites or communication sites. The stuff that's mine should be in my OneDrive. If I'm going to resign, I would write my resignation letter in my OneDrive most likely, because I don't want anyone to know I'm doing it. And then I would share it with my manager. So that's a good use case. It's a work product, but it's not intended for any other larger dissemination. So some questions you should be asking yourself about OneDrives now that this thing is happening. Why are some users' OneDrives so large? What's going in there? Are they using those OneDrives appropriately? ShareGate can help you with reporting there. Again, even before OneDrives become unlicensed, while they're active. If you have really, really large OneDrives, you might need to, have a conversation with those people. Hey, we're not looking in there, but how are you using your OneDrive? Are you keeping stuff in the right place? And part of that is what type of content is in there. I've seen lots of instances where, especially developers, they might have a report from some system dumped into their OneDrive every day. And so they might only have one file, but they've got 1,000 versions of it, and they're big versions. So is that a good idea? Maybe it should go somewhere else. Certainly should go somewhere else if that person is not necessarily going to be around for a long time, because when they leave, that dumping won't work anymore because that OneDrive will get locked up or disappear. How many sharing links are in these OneDrives? Are people sharing a lot of content out to a lot of people? If I'm sharing something with my manager, if I'm sharing something with one coworker, that's a good use case. If I'm sharing something with my entire department or with the organization, which I'm not going to be able to do anymore, then I'm not doing the right thing with my OneDrive. That's not the intent of what you store there. So that change is like I said, a good thing, but it also may expose some issues that you have in your organization. How do you monitor those active OneDrives to ensure good governance? So what can you do on an ongoing basis? Not just, react to this one problem and then forget about OneDrives again, but how can you make a better lifecycle management process for your organization to manage OneDrives? ShareGate, again, really good for reporting for stuff like this. Make sure people know what they should not store in their OneDrives. Have a policy. We always talk about policies as an example at Simpraxis because everybody seems to know what a policy is. But you should have policies for things like this. What should you store and where? The answer is different for every person, but if you're storing your CD collection in your OneDrive, you're doing the wrong thing. That's not what it's for, unless your company culture dictates it. My policy is not necessarily the same as your policy, but make sure people know what they should not store in OneDrives. When should users store their files in OneDrive, and when should they put them in somewhere else? Some things are fine to have in OneDrive, but they shouldn't stay there, which is different than not being, something you shouldn't store in a OneDrive. And then when you do need to put it somewhere else, where should it go? What should that story be? And then who should really decide what happens with OneDrive content when somebody leaves? Unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, it's IT. IT doesn't know the person. They don't know what kind of work they did. They just know that there's this container and there's some stuff in it, and they look at it as a problem, whereas that person's manager might look at it as a gold mine. So make sure that you think about who should have access to the content in a OneDrive after somebody leaves, and how they should be informed of that, understand the implications, understand the responsibilities of that. Another policy, maybe at least a governance thing, so that people understand how to retain the value that might exist within the content in that OneDrive. So I think it's absolutely true to say that OneDrives are often the forgotten children in content management in Microsoft 365. We think, oh, people are only putting their own stuff in there, but in reality, we know that's not the case. I can tell you, having looked in, I don't know how many tenants in the last 10 years. People put all kinds of stuff in there, some of which should be, and some of which shouldn't. So don't ignore them. Without some direction, some governance, people will do things that are actually not a good idea. Not malicious, not horrifying, but maybe they're sharing too many files from their OneDrives. Maybe they're storing collaborative stuff. Maybe the entire HR, I'm picking on HR too much today. Maybe the entire marketing department is working in one person's OneDrive. That's not the way it's supposed to work. And if you're in a situation where you're in that marketing department and you're working in one person's OneDrive, this is a good impetus for you to have a conversation with your IT folks and say, we actually need a marketing team site so that we don't do this wrong. So if you're not in the IT department, you can take that back and have a better conversation with them. And then think about what content people are putting into their OneDrives that actually ought to be covered by other protection of some sort, retentions labels or sensitivity labels. We typically don't use those on somebody's OneDrive because it's not supposed to be that. It's like where stars are born. There's just a lot of primordial soup there in a OneDrive, as opposed to in a team site or on an intranet where that content is firmly gelled and has been published to someone. It's in its completed state or close to it. So This whole exercise, everything I'm talking about today, should be seen as an opportunity to educate your users, which is never a bad thing. Come up with a way to give people a bit better perspective on how they're using their OneDrive. Here's some references. I know that they're all available over in the resources tab on the right side. Looks like a little folder. So if you want those links, they're all there. I believe these are all links to Microsoft articles. I think so. So if you're in IT, that first article, Manage Unlicensed OneDrive User Accounts, is a must read. I had to read it 6 or 8 times to understand well enough to talk about this today, and to work with some clients on it. It's not a very straightforward article. It's got all the facts, and it's got some FAQs at the end. A separate link there, because I think the FAQs are things you're going to actually get to pretty quickly if you read the article. I think that, oh no, I put this slide together. It's not a ShareGate advertisement. This is my advertisement for why I love ShareGate and how it can help with this whole process. OneDrive content inventories. There is no UI in Microsoft 365 to see all of the OneDrives. So if you want to do a content inventory, ShareGate can help you do that. It can report on OneDrive content. It can also help find sharing links that are in OneDrives and sort of let you know, well, how many people are these links available to? If you're sharing with 1 or 2 people, probably right. If you're sharing to 6 departments, you're probably not doing the right thing. You can assign permissions using ShareGate. So if you want to, use ShareGate as part of your offboarding process, you can assign permissions to somebody's manager, for example. There is an automated way to do that, but if you want it to be a little snazzier, you could use ShareGate to help you out. And then content migration. Content's in OneDrives, and you'd like to put it somewhere else. Content migration is one of ShareGate's sort of core capabilities, and it can help you with that. So I think, Shaylin, I'm handing it back to you at this point.
Awesome. Yes. Excellent. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, just to kind of continue on, obviously ShareGate, we're all about them smooth migrations. We want to make it as easy as possible. And this is a great slide for it, because talking about OneDrive, we do a bunch of OneDrive migrations. We actually just did a Ask the Expert session on it today, but we make it super simple for you. No configuration required, no manual. It's out of the box, ready to go. No data caps, all workloads, unlimited support, and transparent fees. Like, we make it as simple and upfront as possible, and we want to make sure you get all of that same experience. So definitely, yeah, talk to an expert, book a demo. If we're so transparent about it, and this is something I've talked to with the sales and our experts who do the demos. If they don't think it's right for you, they'll tell you. If they're like, you know what, ShareGate's not right for you. That's how honest we are, right? We're very transparent about everything. To go further into kind of making making OneDrive offboarding easy with ShareGate, it doesn't have to be a race against the clock. It just needs the right game plan. So with ShareGate, we help you tackle the offboarding efficiently, ensuring no critical data slips through the cracks while keeping your environment secure and clutter-free. We make it easy to find and clean up orphaned, inactive, outdated, and oversized files. No more sifting through the mountain of irrelevant content. We do all the heavy lifting for you. We uncover and fix broken inheritance and user permissions, so you don't have the lingering access issues after an employee leaves. And it doesn't even stop there, because we help you manage externally shared links and revoke access automatically. So you don't even have former employee files floating around where they shouldn't be. And finally, our tools do let you restructure and organize your OneDrive environment, keeping things neat, secure, and ready for the next user. I want to take this. We are going to get to some questions, which we absolutely love, but I do want to mention, we have so many webinars actually this month, which is fantastic. So we have 2 webinars coming up. One of them, March 21st at 10 a.m. Eastern. That is with Microsoft MVP Eric Overfield, Norez Kamis from CryoSpark. They are going to talk about the hidden roadblocks to Copilot success, how to tackle Microsoft 365 data challenges. As well as we have another webinar on March 25th at 1 p.m., and that's with ShareGate experts. That is with our wonderful Ask the Expert experts. They're going to be answering your questions live. You will be able to go right in, type your question, or even speak to them on mic, so you can really dive into some of the troubles that you've had or some of the questions that you've always wanted to know, and maybe you were for some reason, too scared to ask support about. Maybe you didn't think it was necessary, but this is where you can ask all of the questions you'd want, and ShareGate's there to answer them for you. So make sure to register for both of those. And I think, Mark, it's time for some wonderful questions. We had a ton of them come in, so we'll try to get through all of them. I know we have about 10 minutes, and we can jump into those. And
Only easy ones.
Only easy. Okay, well, hold on.
No.
Awesome.
This is a complicated thing, so I may not know all the answers, but I'd be happy to try.
Yeah, and it's actually something that we did mention in the chat, which was, we got a lot of questions, and some of them were, there was, I think you mentioned this even in your presentation, was you had to reread some of those links multiple times, and I think that's where we are gonna work on some blogs and some articles afterwards. So everyone keep an eye on the inbox. We'll send them over your way once those are done, because I think it's an important topic and it's something that is a little bit confusing. So yeah, let's jump into some Q&A. So we got a couple here, and I'm just gonna go off the ones I have. So first question: if we have a single retention policy in place in the tenant, are we able to configure separate retention policies for deleted leaver profiles without impacting the production user's profile policy? Like example, leaver archive profile are in thousands.
Yeah, it depends. Always, it depends, right? If you're applying a retention policy to everything in your tenant, I actually think that's a horrible idea, because different content should have different retention applied to it. That's my opinion, and you're welcome to it. That said, if you do have a retention policy applied to every site, and OneDrive is a site, you do have some granularity in Purview about what you apply retention policies to. So you could take a retention policy off at one site, and say somebody leaves, and you want to change the retention policy on their OneDrive. Well, you can remove the old retention policy using an exception, and then you can apply a different retention policy to it. It's going to be a bit of a headache to manage, but there are some APIs there. You could do some things with PowerShell. So the answer is yes, probably, depending on how you have these things set up.
Right. Okay, perfect. Next question: do we know whether Microsoft will archive data if a OneDrive account is active, unlicensed, but their OneDrive has no content? Example, like if it's showing on the Microsoft OneDrive for Business report as 0.
I actually don't know the answer to that, but because it's got 0 content, you won't pay anything if they do archive it, and you won't pay anything if you want to restore it, because there's no volume. So it's just would be a headache. So that's why I'm saying it would be a good idea to delete those 0 byte OneDrives ahead of time before they go into archive. It's also something that, again, you should probably think about making part of your offboarding process. When somebody leaves, if they've got a 0 byte OneDrive, don't assign their manager to it. What's the point? Just get rid of the thing. So a little planning, I think, on your part would be fine. But even if they do archive the 0s, and again, I don't know if they will or not, it's not going to cost you anything.
Gotcha. So this was something that was asked early on, but it's kind of asking, if you could explain what owner active in Entra ID mean for a reason, even though the user account is disabled.
Sure. I had to figure that out. because that phrase owner active and enter ID doesn't really mean anything, right? So like I said, different organizations do different things when someone leaves. If you're deleting a user from enter ID, then they've been deleted. They're not active anymore. They don't exist as a user in enter ID anymore. If you've just unlicensed them, just removed their licenses, but left the user in there, then they're an active user in the sense that they still exist. So the wording is a little weird, but that seems to be all it means. And when you have an active user in enter ID, that may have tied up their OneDrive because it wouldn't have been automatically deleted because the user was still active. Like I said, that's actually a good scenario if you have seasonal workers or people who come back, because then their OneDrive's still there if they need it.
Gotcha. This next one's a bit of a text, so I apologize. I'll try to shorten it up. It's something that ShareGate doesn't help with. It's about unlocking sites, but wanted to see if you'd have something to talk about. So, the question being, the site can't be deleted because the site's locked. Learn how to lock sites by using Microsoft PowerShell. So when we try to delete an account, do we still need to use PowerShell? Is there another way? These sites are showing that the deletion is blocked by owner active in enter ID, and we remove the license because these are contractors, but the user is still active.
That why it hasn't been, I think that's sort of two questions. The why a user has, or why a OneDrive hasn't been deleted may say the user is active in enter ID. That's why historically it hasn't been deleted. That doesn't mean it's not going to be deleted now. If you don't have a retention policy, it will be deleted now if it's been unlicensed and it runs the 93 days with some caveats around the number of days because of the settings. The other part of that question, the first part, which now I've just lost.
The parts, like learn how to unlock sites by using.
Unlock sites. Yeah. So there's a lock state for sites, SharePoint sites and OneDrive sites. It's not a thing that gets set that I know of in any automated way. So my guess is you've got a process running that is setting that lock state to locked, or there are like 4 different states. So that, as far as I know, there's no other way to change that value except with PowerShell, but it's not that hard to do with PowerShell. And if you can't figure that out, let me know and I'll give you an example.
Perfect. So another question here. It says, for us, it says enable billing to reactivate archived OneDrive accounts in the admin center. So I guess we are okay as long as we do not enable billing.
No, that sounds like a good dodge, doesn't it? I don't know exactly what's going to happen here. None of the documentation I've read makes this clear. They are going to start archiving. If you have a retention policy applied to a OneDrive, it's unlicensed, it will be archived and you will be charged money for that. So I don't know what the mechanism is that's going to turn on the archive billing, but it's going to happen. Because that puts content into a state where it is going into archive, and if there's content in that site, then you're gonna get charged for it. So that's why I'm suggesting you should turn on archiving and set it up the way you want it now, so that you know how it's set up.
Gotcha. And
I apologize. I know we have people from all over the world, and I'm saying a nickel. In the US, that's the value. I don't know what it is in every other country.
Yeah, fair enough. You said for the +30 to kick in, the user has to be deleted. What happens with the users that are just unlicensed?
Historically, their OneDrive just sits around. That's why you have that list, the 1,600 in that one client example that I gave you. But that's been historically. I think what's going to happen now is if there's nothing keeping that OneDrive from being deleted, it's going to be deleted. You could choose to archive it. You could choose to put a retention policy on it. But at the moment, we're sort of in this flux state where historically unlicensed OneDrives have not been deleted, but they will start to be.
Mm-hmm. And if we don't opt into the billing, will the deletion still occur for those OneDrives?
The deletions will have nothing to do with the billing. Think of the deletions as Microsoft thinking, well, you haven't paid us for this, and you don't want to pay us for this, so we're going to get rid of this stuff. So in a sense, it's not billing you. If you want to keep things, you may end up incurring charges.
Gotcha.
You will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Obviously, we want to respect everyone's time, so it is time. There's still a lot of questions, so we're definitely going to want to get to them, but maybe we can do something there. But we will, of course, as I mentioned, we will get to all the questions, and our team can follow up. And as we mentioned as well, we're going to do a lot of articles and blogs on this because it's clearly a very kind of a article that needs to be written is what I'm trying to go for. But I really want to thank Mark for joining us today. Thank you so much for providing your insight. It was really helpful. Just got a lot of questions, so we know it's a good one. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Excellent. And yeah, everyone, the resources are there. We have our, you'll get the webinar in the email. So look forward to all of that. Thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful day.